Hello class, welcome to week 1 of WorldCiv106 in our late start class. By now I hope that many of you at least have looked at the syllabus, and I just want to say that a lot of times, for those of you that have never had me, the syllabus can look a little overwhelming, and the start of my class can feel a little overwhelming at first, because a lot of students are not aware, like they're trying to understand why there's so much stuff going on. The reality is that my class really is very simple in terms of a straightforward approach, which I've explained. And so I need you to, I want to make some things clear. Every video that I post, you do have to watch. And every video, regardless of whether or not I'm giving the lecture, that includes documentaries that I post, you have to write on. Sometimes I'll tell you I want more than 2 notes if I have you watch something that's longer than like 10 or 15 minutes. Now, what you need to realize is that if you put all those videos together, it's still shorter than the amount, or about the same amount of time it would take for you to sit in a face-to-face class and hear a lecture. So I'm not really having you do that much. The notes I make you do, I'll tell you for a simple reason. Nobody's going to watch the videos. I shouldn't say nobody, but a good chunk of you will not watch the videos unless you have to, because you're all busy, you have things to do, and you cut corners where you can in life. Now, as your professor, I'm trying to help support you in your life, but I'm here to teach you a class and to help you to learn and to give you an academic education. Okay? So the notes are used for that reason. I'm going to give an example of a sample of notes as well. I'm going to post soon of what I'm looking for. And just to make it really clear, I want you to demonstrate that you learned something. I don't want you to just try to listen to the first few seconds of a lecture or a documentary and write down something that's not really relevant to the topic. If I mention Martin Luther in the Reformation, then I want us to know, in the notes I should see why did this person get brought up? What's the significance of them compared to so many other people that have lived? Why are we talking about this person? So I'm looking for that kind of stuff. Now, I want to let you know that I grade especially easy on the first week, as you guys are getting familiar with the routine and trying to figure out what I want. That's always been, when I was in college as a student, the most stressful thing was just to figure out like what the professor wants. So I really do I think I work very hard at helping you guys quickly get an idea so that you can just kind of sit back and enjoy the work, the information. And as I mentioned with this late start, some weeks we're going to double down. This week we're starting off like a normal week, but because it's late start, some weeks we're going to be cramming, okay? So be aware of that and plan accordingly, okay? The other thing I want to mention, and I talk about this in some of my in some of the lectures themselves for this week. This week is going to be a little bit of a challenge to some of to a lot of you, because it deals with the topic of evolution. And I also teach world religions as an emphasis in my class to work with too, which I'm going to expand more upon. But that can be controversial on different levels. Here's what I want you all to realize. I grew up in a very religious household. My family, on both sides, have a tradition of I have Catholic priests on one side of my family and women that were in the family that were nuns. I mean, of course the nuns were women. That's what a nun, anyways. And on one side, very hardcore Protestant Baptist ministers. Okay? So I'm aware of religion. I have my own views, which I just try to keep out of the class. But to say that I'm sensitive to the topic of religion, at the very least. I know many students who, when they take a class and there's certain things that challenge their faith, they want to drop the class or they feel attacked. Here's what I'd like you to understand for those of you in this position. My class does not require, and this actually goes for anybody, even people who are hardcore atheists, no one's required to believe in anything that I teach. I'm teaching you a consensus view of, initially we're going to start with science and anthropology, and then a consensus view of history, and a method that historians do. And so what you're learning is not just the history, but the methodologies of history and what makes people come to certain conclusions. When you were in high school, you probably, actually throughout all of your life in school, elementary years up into high school, I think that probably a lot of you learned the wrong idea of history. Not because your teachers were necessarily inadequate, but because of the way that it's set up. You're told that there is a true and false answer, and you're told to pick A, B, or C. Now that's, I mean, I guess that can be all right, but historians, we kind of are like, in a sense, like lawyers. Right? And that's why many lawyers actually come from the field of history, by the way. But, okay, when there's a murder and there's a crime, you investigate. Well, there's investigators. So in a sense, a lawyer is actually kind of like a detective and a lawyer. Basically, you're trying to figure out what happened, and you come up with a certain amount of evidence, and you draw a conclusion. And sometimes you have a lot of things, you have a lot of evidence to work with. You have confessions, you have videos, you have all sorts of things, right? So you can, when you think about the justice system, some things are very straightforward. But then we know that innocent people are sent to prison, that everybody in the institution got it wrong. And it could be based on prejudice, it could be just based on ignorance. They could have been sincere, but the information was just wrong. So historians are kind of in the same boat. We work with what we have. And historians have their own bias and inclinations. They overlook things. There are political factors that sometimes get around what historians will look to. In any case, I think that I also don't want to undermine in your mind the value of history. It's tremendously important because, as you will see, the information that we get does matter, and it helps us to kind of take a bird's eye view, look back at the history of humanity. It's very important. Now, why do I start then? Why does the textbook start with evolution? Is that even fair? Well, here's the problem. Where do we start, right? Now, if you take the biblical tradition, you have the Hebrew Bereshit. That's what it starts in the book of Genesis. In fact, Genesis in Hebrew is called Bereshit, in the beginning. And it says, bara. He created. He creates. God, Elohim. God creates. Now, that's not how the Rig Veda starts in the Hindu tradition. That's not what starts in the Buddhist texts. You have many countries around the world, that's not how history starts. If I start with the biblical tradition, then that is a religious bias in the class for understanding. Now, this is a theology class now, and from a particular point of view. If we don't favor one particular point of view and we're just going to try to look back at the origins of humanity, then where would you start with? You see, it's complicated. Now, scientists have a consensus view about the emergence of human beings. And that is what's believed by the majority of scientists. Not all, but the majority. So I think that, as a historian, you should have an understanding of what the majority of physical anthropologists and scientists have as the belief to the historical emergence of humans. So again, you're not being told you have to buy into this, but you should know you need to be aware of why this is believed, right? And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't believe in it. I'm not telling you what you should and shouldn't believe. What I'm saying is that this is the information you're being exposed to. For some of you who are not religious and you're listening to this, you might be a little bit confused or baffled why I'm even having this discussion. Well, that's the whole point also. Keep in mind that our own personal histories shape the way in which we approach the world and what we're comfortable with and what we're not. Right? So listen to, quickly, I will talk about the topic of when I go into world religions. So the reason why I'm going into that is because I think that that's something that you guys can grasp mentally the easiest. Now, one of the challenges is this. Okay, let's say that I talk about Greek mythology and let's say that there are still a large population of people believing in Greek gods. There are not. There are some, though, by the way. But, and that's a newer thing. But most people don't feel uncomfortable when somebody else's culture is being talked about and deconstructed. But then when you get to your own, it becomes much more uncomfortable. I'm aware of that as well. And so what I just want to say is this, is as we go over the history of how religion developed, okay, many traditions have this idea that spirit, God, the universe, inspired certain things to come about, and that prophets are real, and that miracles really happen. And historians are trying to get through all that and see what can we actually learn from what happened by looking just at with the material on the ground, so to speak. It's not an idea of saying that, of disrespecting those any of these systems. It's just that's the approach that we take. It's the approach that everybody takes, except when it comes to their own personal thing, right? I mean, isn't that true? So, in any case, I think that you will be enriched for it. I think that, and the majority of my students come out of this, whether they are a very strong believers in a particular faith or they're not. I feel really passionate about the subject. I feel like a lot of my students then communicate with me and are really, really happy that they had the opportunity to learn about these things. And in a world that's so polarized, where people have so much anger, Jonathan Swift, the guy who wrote the story Gulliver's Travels, he said something to the effect of, most people have enough religion to hate, but not enough to love. And so even back then, centuries ago, maybe not that many centuries ago, but it didn't take much for anybody to observe that religion plays an important role in human history, and that it often is divisive for people. So the more you know, I think the more you can have at least a more proper understanding about where to place things and figure out what's going on. Now, I'm going to be done with that. This is already long enough. I want you to know that I work a lot, but I try to be open, to communicate, to take your questions. I encourage you to call or write to me if you want to discuss any of these issues or you have technical issues that you want to deal with. I try to be as approachable as possible and to be as helpful as possible. And so, having said that, I welcome you all into my class. I am looking forward to I'm working with you, and I hope that we have a great semester.